Jodi Peterson. Today I'll be doing an informative speech for my communications class. With me today is Matthew Sanderson, Jane Sanderson, Heidi Peterson, Eleanor Sanderson, Emily Sanderson, and my husband David is videotaping. When I was engaged to my husband, I said to him, "Honey, I will follow you anywhere, except Alaska. I do not want to drive by it, cruise to it, or fly over it." To which he said, "I don't think that's going to be a problem." Fast forward 6 years, and we are at our first duty station in Alaska. I am 25 years old when he has his first deployment. It was supposed to be a 12-month deployment, but it became 14 months. Those 2 extra months might not sound like much, but every day that goes past that 1-year mark seems to have 48 hours in it. This deployment was rough because Dave was a platoon leader, Cav Scout, which means he was on the front lines during the surge. So there I was in Alaska with 2 little boys, thousands of miles away from my family, and all on my own. I immersed myself in Alaska and enjoyed my time there. We made it through that first deployment just fine, but deployments are emotionally draining and psychologically stressful. We left Alaska in October 2008 and moved to Augusta, Georgia for military training. At school, we got our orders. Our next assignment would be in Texas, and Dave would immediately deploy upon our arrival there. The Army dwell time at the time was 12 months. Dwell time is time in between deployments. At this point, we were at 18 months, which, although above the Army standard, that was just still so close together to pack 2 deployments back to back. During this time of our lives, we had just had a baby girl. My younger sister, who has Down syndrome, was living with us while my parents served a mission for their church. So less than 7 months after we moved from Augusta to Killeen, Texas, into terrible housing while we waited for Dave to deploy again. With 2 little boys and my Down syndrome sister by my side, we waved goodbye to David and moved home to Washington State to live with my older sister. Upon arrival, I was horribly overweight. Not only had I had a baby, but I had been displaced for 3 months, and during that time I ate like a gluttonous pig. In an attempt to turn my situation around, I talked my friend Lisa into joining Weight Watchers with me. And thus began my quest to gain a measure of control in a life that I clearly had no control over. Early in December 2009, the Biggest Loser contestants for the finale ran a marathon. At the conclusion of that finale, I sat down at my computer, I signed up for a marathon. 1 week later, my friend Lisa, my Weight Watchers pal, she joined with me. And the 2 of us bought the book, The Non-Runner's Marathon Trainer, and we began to train. That Christmas, I went to my in-laws' house, and New Year's Eve, my father-in-law, Paul, drove me to Salt Lake City to run a 5K at 11:30 p.m. Now, running in Eastern Washington and running in Salt Lake City are 2 different things because of the elevation. So Paul drove me up there, and I missed the mark by 30 seconds. But as I crossed the finish line, he had the biggest ear-to-ear grin, and I knew that it didn't matter. He couldn't have been more proud of me. That is a night I will never forget, because my husband, he was raised by very involved parents. He was raised in an environment of encouragement, competition, and total support. I have wonderful parents, but this is not how I was raised. I am the 7th of 8 children, and my parents were very tired. So I went back to Washington State, and I began my training. While I trained, there was one 12-mile run that was particularly difficult. It was so hard that I don't even know today how I finished that run. Upon the conclusion of that run, I called my in-laws, and I spelled it all out very clearly so they knew how hard that run was for me. And at the end of that conversation, my father-in-law said to me, "So what? You can do hard things." I knew that he was right. Even though I was looking for something different, I knew he was right, and I could do hard things. As I progressed in my training, my parents let me know that they could not come to my marathon. They had an excellent excuse, they really did, but I still needed them there so badly. I knew that if they couldn't come, that I had to have Paul and Roma. But Paul's job at the time did not offer any paid days off, and I just could not ask them to come to my marathon. It turned out that I didn't have to ask, they came anyway. I was overjoyed to have their support. Race day came and I was broken. I had trained too hard, too fast. During my training, I was able to maintain a 10-minute mile pace and was able to do that during my 20-mile run. But that run had been 3 weeks earlier, and that day, the day of the race, I walked with a limp and I was completely broken. So I started that marathon and I never got my breath and I never got my stride, and every single step of that marathon was difficult. Somewhere around mile 20, Paul jumped out of the car and he started running with me. He was wearing blue Crocs with no socks, and he finished 6.2 miles with me, even though he had not trained at all. There were times in that 6.2 miles that I got very mad at Paul for not leaving me alone to wallow in my own self-misery, but he knew I was hurting and he was not going to leave me. He was going to help me get to that finish line. I did finish that race. My time was 50 minutes slower than what I had trained at. My right hip was riddled with stress fractures, and it took my body 10 months to heal from that experience. 3 weeks later, exactly, Paul had his first of 2 brain surgeries to remove a glioblastoma in the left side of his brain. Paul had stage 4 brain cancer. The final physically demanding thing that Paul was able to do was that marathon with me. It was me, not his kids who had felt his love all of his life, but me, who needed it so bad, that got the honor to have Paul in his last physically demanding activity. Not a week goes by that I don't think about Paul and his insistence on running that with me. It's been 2.5 years and Paul is still alive. It has been horribly painful to watch the cancer transform his physically active body into something completely different. It's slowed him down tremendously. But Paul remains positive through all of his trials, and he leads by example. Generations to come will still be gleaning from the positive imprint Paul has left in this life. He embodies the phrase, "I can do hard things." I wish I could shine his light to the whole world and help them understand. It doesn't matter what comes your way, you can do hard things.